Scott Damon's eyes snapped open as his consciousness registered an unfamiliar weight pressing against his chest. The morning sunlight filtering through his bedroom window illuminated a sight that made his heart skip several beats. His new alien housekeeper, Liana, was sprawled across his naked body, her lavender skin gleaming in the golden rays. "What the actual?" he whispered, his mind racing to process the situation. Her smooth, bald head with its delicate crest rested just below his chin, her warm breath tickling his chest. The contrast between her exotic alien features and very human-like curves created a surreal tableau that left him momentarily paralyzed. His slight movement caused Liana's large sapphire eyes to flutter open. For a brief moment, they stared at each other in mutual shock before she gracefully rolled off him, her movements fluid despite her obvious embarrassment. "By the stars, Mr. Damon, I must apologize for startling you," she exclaimed, her melodious voice carrying notes of genuine distress. "This is entirely my fault. I should have explained my species' customs more thoroughly when I accepted this position." Scott sat up hastily, pulling the sheet around his waist while trying to maintain his composure. "Liana, I'm going to need one hell of an explanation for the situation." She perched on the edge of the bed, seemingly unaware of her own nudity. "You see, my people of the Ethri are communal sleepers. We share body heat to conserve energy. It's deeply ingrained in our biology and culture. After finishing my evening duties, I noticed your sleeping form, and, well, my instincts took over." She paused, her crest flushing a deeper shade of purple. "I should have realized humans might view this differently." Scott ran a hand through his tousled brown hair, fighting to keep his eyes focused on her face despite the awkwardness of the situation. He couldn't help but notice how the morning light played across her exotic features, highlighting the delicate patterns on her crest. "I must admit, Liana," Scott said, a hint of mischief creeping into his voice, "humans generate an impressive amount of body heat. It's quite intoxicating." She shifted slightly, and Scott found himself increasingly aware of their state of undress. "Look," he said, trying to maintain a professional tone despite the circumstances, "I appreciate the cultural explanation, but on Earth, this kind of situation usually implies different intentions." Liana's crest rippled in what he was beginning to recognize as curiosity. "Different intentions?" "Oh!" Her eyes widened as understanding dawned. "You mean mating customs? How fascinating. In my culture, we have very specific rituals for that. This was purely for warmth, I assure you." She paused, then added with a slight smile, "Though I must say, your physiological response suggests humans might combine the two concepts." Scott felt his face grow hot. "Jesus, Liana, you can't just... we need to establish some boundaries here." "Of course," she agreed, finally seeming to notice her state of undress. She gracefully retrieved her uniform from where it was neatly folded on a nearby chair. "Although I must admit, this has been the most comfortable rest I've had since arriving on Earth." As she dressed, Scott couldn't help but admire her fluid movements. He'd hired her through the Interstellar Domestic Services Agency, impressed by her references and the agency's reputation. Now, he wondered if he should have asked more questions about potential cultural differences. "Perhaps," Liana suggested, now fully dressed but still looking somewhat flushed, "we could discuss these cultural differences over breakfast. I've been practicing human cooking techniques, and I'd very much like your opinion on my attempts at something called pancakes." Scott couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. "Pancakes sound great, but maybe we should establish some ground rules first. Rule number 1. Clothing is mandatory outside of private quarters." "Noted," Liana said with a playful smile. Though I must point out, Mr. Damon, you're still quite naked yourself. Right? Scott coughed, suddenly very aware of his situation. How about you start on those pancakes while I get dressed? As you wish, she replied, heading for the door. At the threshold, she paused and looked back with an expression he couldn't quite read. And Mr. Damon, despite the cultural misunderstanding, I hope this hasn't made things awkward between us. No more awkward than finding my alien housekeeper using me as a body pillow, Scott replied with a wry smile. And please call me Scott. After this morning, I think we're past formalities. Liana's crest rippled in what appeared to be pleasure. Scott, she said, testing the name on her tongue. Very well. Though I should warn you, my species forms strong emotional bonds through physical proximity. You might find me becoming rather attached. Before Scott could process the implications of that statement, she gracefully slipped out the door, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the lingering warmth where her body had pressed against his. Me, he muttered, falling back onto his pillows. What have I gotten myself into?